November 18, 1944, in the dense Hurtgen forest along the German-Belgian border. A cold, piercing rain fell through the mist-shrouded pines as Corporal Marcus Johnson of the 2nd Marine Division sat hunched over a tangle of copper wire, his fingers nearly numb from the biting cold. The German armored divisions were reported to be just 20 kilometers away, preparing for a counter-offensive that military intelligence believed would utilize their formidable Tiger tanks. What the German command confidently projected as an unstoppable advance would soon meet an unexpected obstacle from the most unlikely source. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one overlooked Marine with an unconventional background would develop an improvised method that transformed the capabilities of Allied forces against German armor, proving that sometimes the most significant battlefield innovations come not from military engineers or generals, but from those whose diverse experiences bring fresh perspectives to seemingly insurmountable problems. "You still working on that contraption, Johnson?" Staff Sergeant William Miller called out as he approached the makeshift workshop tent where several Marines had gathered to escape the persistent drizzle. The tent glowed with the soft amber light of kerosene lamps, casting long shadows across the faces of the men inside. "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, not looking up from his work. His hands moved with practiced precision despite the cold. "Almost got it figured out. General Thompson wants updates on all field preparations by 0600 tomorrow. Whatever you're cooking up better be ready for the briefing," Miller said, his breath visible in the chilly air. "It will be, Sergeant. I promise you that." Marcus Johnson was not the typical Marine. Before the war, he had worked as an electrical lineman for the Tennessee Valley Authority, climbing poles and stringing wire across rural Tennessee, bringing electricity to communities that had never known it before. Born to a sharecropper father who had served in the Great War and a mother who taught at a one-room schoolhouse, Johnson had developed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems from an early age, tinkering with broken farm equipment and eventually putting himself through 2 years of technical school. When Johnson had attempted to enlist after Pearl Harbor, he had been directed to service and support roles rather than combat units. But a progressive commanding officer named Colonel James Henderson had recognized Johnson's technical aptitude and unusual problem-solving abilities. After witnessing Johnson's quick repair of a malfunctioning radio that had stumped several technicians, Henderson had personally requested Johnson's transfer to his unit. "That young man sees connections the rest of us miss," Henderson had noted in his transfer request. "His background gives him perspectives we desperately need." Now, as the Allied forces prepared for what would likely be the final major German offensive of the war, Johnson was drawing on his civilian experience to address a problem that had plagued Allied forces since the beginning of the conflict: the seemingly impenetrable German Tiger tanks. Lieutenant Thomas Crawford entered the tent, shaking rainwater from his coat. A West Point graduate with a degree in engineering, Crawford had initially dismissed Johnson's ideas as impractical field modifications, but after several late-night discussions where Johnson had methodically laid out his thinking, Crawford had become his strongest advocate. "How's it coming?" Crawford asked, crouching beside Johnson to examine the device. "Getting there, sir," Johnson replied, tightening a connection with a pair of pliers. "The principle is sound, just need to make it field-ready." "Walk me through it again," Crawford said, pulling up a wooden crate to sit on. Johnson put down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. "Back in Tennessee, we had a problem with the main transformers shorting out during storms. Nothing in the manual worked, so I rigged up a bypass circuit with a specific type of copper winding that could handle the surge." "And you think this same principle could work against tank armor?" Crawford asked, skepticism evident in his voice despite his support. "Not against the armor directly," Johnson explained. "That's where everyone's thinking wrong. We can't penetrate those front plates with what we've got. But every machine has a vulnerability. For the Tigers, it's their electrical system." Johnson unrolled a crude diagram he had sketched on the back of a supply requisition form. "The Tigers use an advanced electrical system for their turret rotation and communications." If we can disrupt that system with a strong enough electromagnetic pulse delivered at the right frequency, we can immobilize the turret or even shut down their engines temporarily. Crawford studied the diagram with growing interest. And these coils you're building? They're modified versions of what we used on the power lines. When placed in the right configuration and triggered by our own tank's electrical system, they create a directional pulse that can temporarily overload the German systems. At a nearby table, Corporal David Levinsky, who had been a radio operator before being assigned to Johnson's project, looked up from the communications unit he was modifying. "It's like creating a targeted lightning strike," he explained. "We're essentially turning their electrical sophistication against them." Outside the tent, the distinctive sound of jeep engines announced the arrival of more officers. Colonel Robert Turner, the battle-hardened commander of their regiment, ducked through the tent flap, followed by Captain Frederick Schmidt, the battalion intelligence officer. Both men were soaked from the rain, their uniforms dark with moisture. "Gentlemen," Turner acknowledged the men, who quickly stood at attention. "At ease. I came to see this miracle device I've been hearing about. Schmidt here has been talking it up like it's going to win us the war single-handed." Johnson looked nervously at Crawford, who nodded encouragingly. "It's not a miracle, sir," Johnson said cautiously. "Just applied electrical principles, but it could give us an advantage against their armor." Turner's weathered face revealed nothing as he gestured for Johnson to continue. Over the next 30 minutes, Johnson explained his concept, demonstrating with the prototype he had assembled from scavenged parts and materials requisitioned from supply. He showed how the wire configurations, when properly aligned and powered, created an electromagnetic field that could disrupt electrical systems at close range without damaging Allied equipment. "The beauty of it is its simplicity, sir," Johnson concluded. "We can manufacture these with materials we already have. They're lightweight, portable, and can be deployed by infantry ahead of our armor or attached to the lead tanks themselves." Turner remained silent for a long moment after Johnson finished his explanation. The only sound in the tent was the pattering of rain on canvas and the occasional distant rumble of artillery. "You realize what you're proposing has never been field-tested," Turner finally said. "We'd be deploying an unproven technology against the most advanced tanks in the European theater." "With respect, sir," Crawford interjected, "the theoretical foundation is sound. Johnson's calculations check out, and we've successfully disrupted vehicle electrical systems in limited tests." Turner turned to Schmidt. "What's intelligence saying about German armor movements?" Schmidt unfolded a map on the table, weighing down the corners with ammunition casings. "Latest reports indicate significant armor concentrations here and here," he said, pointing to positions near the German border. "At least 3 panzer divisions, including elements of the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion with Tiger IIs. They appear to be preparing for a major push through the Ardennes." Turner studied the map, his expression grave. "And our anti-tank capabilities in those sectors?" "Limited, sir," Schmidt admitted. "The terrain favors their approach. Our standard anti-tank weapons have proven insufficient against frontal Tiger armor." Turner looked back at Johnson, studying him with new interest. "You were a civilian electrician before the war?" "Yes, sir, with the TVA. And Colonel Henderson personally endorsed your transfer to this unit?" "Yes, sir. He felt my background might be useful." Turner nodded slowly. "My father was an engineer with the Edison Company. He always said that the people who actually built and maintained the systems understood them better than the designers ever could." He straightened up. "Very well, Corporal. You have 48 hours to prepare a field demonstration for General Thompson. If your device performs as you claim, we'll fast-track production and deployment." "Thank you, sir," Johnson said, relief evident in his voice. "Don't thank me yet," Turner replied. "If this works, you'll have saved countless lives. If it fails—" He left the sentence unfinished as he turned to leave. "Crawford, I want hourly progress reports and get Johnson whatever he needs." As Turner and Schmidt departed, the tent fell silent. Then Levinsky let out a low whistle. 48 hours to convince a general," he said. "No pressure." Johnson returned to his workbench. "Better get back to it then." Miles away across the front lines, Hauptmann Klaus Weber of the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion sat in the commander's compartment of his Tiger II tank, reviewing the battle plans for the upcoming offensive. A veteran of the Eastern Front, who had been transferred west after being wounded at Kursk, Weber was one of the most experienced Tiger commanders in the Wehrmacht. "The Allied forces have no effective answer to our armor," Weber explained to Lieutenant Ernst Müller, a young officer recently assigned to his command. "Their Sherman tanks are vastly outmatched. They call our Tigers steel coffins for their crews." "Yet they keep coming," Müller observed. "American industrial capacity," Weber said with reluctant admiration. "They can replace their losses. We cannot replace ours. This offensive must succeed decisively, or the strategic situation becomes untenable." Weber spread out the operational maps, pointing to the planned breakthrough sectors. "Our engineers have made recent modifications to our electrical systems. The new models feature improved turret stabilization and more reliable radio communications. Once we break through their initial defenses, their armor will have no choice but to engage us frontally, where our superiority is greatest." What Weber didn't know, what no one in the German High Command knew, was that these sophisticated electrical improvements would soon become their greatest vulnerability. The following morning broke clear and cold, the rain finally having moved eastward. Johnson, Crawford, and their small team had worked through the night, refining the prototype and preparing for the demonstration. They had set up a test area in a small clearing behind the regimental headquarters, using a captured German half-track as a stand-in for a Tiger tank. General Richard Thompson arrived promptly at 0900 hours, accompanied by Colonel Turner and several staff officers. Thompson was an imposing figure, tall and stern, with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and little patience for wasted time. "Colonel Turner tells me you've developed something that might give us an edge against German heavy tanks," Thompson said without preamble, as he approached Johnson. "I've given you 15 minutes to show me something worthwhile." "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, straightening to attention. Over the next 10 minutes, Johnson explained his device, which he had dubbed the electromagnetic disruptor, and its intended effects. He had prepared several units, each consisting of specially wound copper coils connected to a power source and a simple triggering mechanism. "The key innovation, sir, is in the specific winding pattern of the copper wire," Johnson explained. "By creating these precise configurations, we generate a focused electromagnetic pulse when current flows through them. The pulse is harmless to humans and most equipment, but it creates havoc with sophisticated electrical systems like those in the new Tiger tanks." Thompson's expression remained skeptical. "And how is this deployed in a combat situation?" "Two main applications, sir," Crawford answered. "First, as a defensive measure. The units can be concealed along likely tank approach routes and triggered remotely or by pressure plates. Second, as an offensive tool mounted on our own tanks. When activated at close range, within 50 yards or so, it can disable the enemy tank's turret rotation and potentially disrupt their engine ignition systems." "Show me," Thompson said simply. Johnson nodded to Levinsky, who was stationed beside the captured half-track. The vehicle had been modified to approximate the electrical systems of a Tiger tank, based on intelligence reports and examination of captured components. "We'll demonstrate the defensive application first," Johnson said. He led the officers to a position about 30 yards from the half-track, where a small, innocuous-looking device had been partially buried in the ground, with only its antenna visible above the soil. "Corporal Levinsky will start the half-track's engine and attempt to operate its systems," Johnson explained. "When the vehicle passes this point, I'll activate the disruptor." At Johnson's signal, Levinsky started the half-track's engine. The vehicle began to move slowly forward along the prepared track. As it approached the buried device, Johnson pressed the trigger on a handheld controller. There was no visible effect, no explosion, no flash of light. But immediately the half-track's engine sputtered and died. The vehicle's lights flickered out, and the radio antenna mounted on its side gave off a brief shower of sparks. "The electromagnetic pulse has disrupted the ignition system and damaged the radio," Johnson explained, as the officers watched with growing interest. On an actual Tiger, the effect would be similar but more pronounced due to their more complex electrical systems. The turret rotation motors would seize, the radio would be disabled, and in many cases, the engine would stall. Thompson's expression had changed from skepticism to intense interest. "How long does the effect last?" "That varies, sir," Johnson admitted. "Anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes, depending on the specific systems affected and how quickly the crew can reset or bypass them. But in combat, even a 30-second window where a Tiger can't rotate its turret or move could be decisive." "And our own equipment, what prevents this pulse from affecting our tanks and radios?" "The pulse is directional and specifically tuned to the frequencies used in German system," Crawford explained. "Additionally, we've developed simple shielding measures for our own equipment to minimize any collateral effects." Thompson turned to Colonel Turner. "I want a full-scale field test today. Get a company of Shermans from the 11th Armored and set up a realistic scenario." "Yes, sir," Turner replied. "We've already begun preparations at the training grounds 6 miles west of here." Johnson felt a mixture of elation and terror. The small-scale demonstration had gone perfectly, but scaling up to a full company action was far beyond what they had tested so far. "How many functional units do you currently have, Corporal?" Thompson asked. 15 fully operational units." "Sir," Johnson answered, "plus another 10 that are nearly complete." "Get them all ready," Thompson ordered. "I want to see them deployed in multiple configurations." As the officers walked away to discuss the logistics of the larger demonstration, Crawford turned to Johnson with a concerned expression. "Can we really have 25 operational units by this afternoon?" he asked quietly. Johnson looked at his small team: Levinsky, Specialist Robert Chen from Supply, and 2 other Marines who had been assigned to help with assembly. They all looked exhausted from the all-night work session, but there was a new energy in their expressions after the successful demonstration. "We'll need more hands," Johnson said, "and some additional components from Supply." "You'll have whatever you need," Crawford assured him. "This is priority now." By 1400 hours that afternoon, the larger demonstration had been prepared at the training grounds. A company of Sherman tanks from the 11th Armored Division had been positioned along a wooded ridge, while 3 captured German vehicles, including a Panzer IV that would serve as a stand-in for a Tiger, were positioned in the valley below. Johnson's devices had been deployed in 3 configurations, some buried along likely approach routes, others mounted on the lead Sherman tanks, and a few set up as portable units that could be carried and deployed by infantry squads. General Thompson had returned, now accompanied by Brigadier General Howard Lewis, commander of the 11th Armored Division, and several other high-ranking officers. The stakes had grown considerably since the morning demonstration. "Corporal Johnson will coordinate the employment of his devices during this exercise," Colonel Turner explained to the assembled officers. "We've prepared 3 scenarios to demonstrate different tactical applications." The first scenario simulated a German armored thrust against a prepared defensive position. As the Panzer IV approached the American lines, it triggered one of Johnson's buried disruptors. Just as in the morning demonstration, the vehicle suddenly lost power, its turret freezing in mid-rotation. The second scenario showcased the offensive application, with Sherman tanks approaching the now restarted Panzer from multiple directions. When the lead Sherman closed to within 40 yards, the tank commander activated the mounted disruptor unit. Again, the German vehicle's electrical systems failed, rendering it temporarily combat ineffective. The final demonstration involved infantry deploying the portable units. A squad of Marines quickly set up 3 disruptors in a triangular pattern around the German vehicle, creating an overlapping field that not only disabled the tank systems, but also prevented them from being quickly restored. Throughout the demonstrations, Johnson provided running commentary, explaining the technical aspects of what was occurring and answering the officers' increasingly detailed questions. When the exercise concluded, General Thompson gathered his staff for a brief conference out of earshot of Johnson and his team. After several minutes of intense discussion, Thompson approached Johnson. "Corporal, your device appears to function as advertised," Thompson said, his tone formal, but with an undercurrent of excitement that was impossible to miss. "I'm authorizing immediate production of 1,000 units, with priority allocation of all necessary materials and personnel." Johnson struggled to maintain his military bearing in the face of this announcement. "Thank you, sir. Colonel Turner will oversee the production effort," Thompson continued. "Lieutenant Crawford will serve as technical liaison." You will work directly under Crawford to supervise manufacturing and train deployment teams. Yes, sir, Johnson replied. I'm also recommending you for a battlefield commission to second lieutenant, Thompson added. This innovation may significantly alter our tactical options against German armor. Well done. As the generals departed to begin implementing the production orders, Crawford turned to Johnson with a broad grin. Looks like you just changed the course of the war, soon-to-be Lieutenant Johnson. Johnson shook his head, still processing what had just occurred. We haven't proven it in actual combat yet. That'll come soon enough, Crawford said, his expression becoming serious again. Intelligence reports suggest the German offensive may begin within the week. We need to get as many units to the front as possible before then. The next 5 days were a blur of feverish activity. Johnson, now officially promoted to the rank of second lieutenant, oversaw a rapidly expanding production operation that had taken over an abandoned factory building near regimental headquarters. Dozens of technicians and electricians had been reassigned from various units to assist with manufacturing the disruptors, which had been officially designated Tank Electrical System Disruptors, TESDs, but were already being called Johnson boxes by the troops. Chief Warrant Officer Raymond Parker, who had been an electrical manufacturing foreman in civilian life, helped organize the production line for maximum efficiency. We've set up 3 shifts, Parker explained to Johnson, as they toured the facility on the evening before the units were to be distributed to frontline units. We're completing almost 100 units per day now. Quality control is still an issue, but we're maintaining about an 85% pass rate on final testing. That's not good enough, Johnson said, examining a failed unit. A 15% failure rate in combat could cost lives. We're working on it, Parker assured him. Each batch is showing improvement as the teams get more experienced. Meanwhile, Crawford was coordinating with divisional staff to develop tactical doctrine for employing the disruptors. Training teams were being dispatched to frontline units to provide crash courses in deployment techniques and maintenance. The 1st and 30th Infantry Divisions will receive the initial allocations, Crawford informed Johnson during an evening briefing. They're positioned in sectors where intelligence believes the main German thrust will come. The 7th Armoured and 11th Armoured will get the next batches for their tank battalions. Johnson nodded, studying the deployment maps. Has there been any word on German movements? Increased activity all along the front, Crawford replied. Weather's been too poor for good aerial reconnaissance, but radio intercepts suggest they're marshalling their forces. It could begin any day now. On December 16, 1944, the German offensive that would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge began with a massive artillery barrage along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes forest. Under cover of poor weather that grounded Allied aircraft, German armored columns began pushing through Allied lines, aiming for a breakthrough that would split the American and British forces and potentially change the course of the war. Second Lieutenant Marcus Johnson was attached to the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, supporting the 30th Infantry Division when the attack began. He had personally supervised the deployment of 60 disruptor units in their sector the previous day, training crews on proper placement and activation techniques. German armor reported advancing along Route 412, the radio operator announced in the battalion command post, a reinforced cellar in a small Belgian village. Multiple Tiger tanks identified leading the column. Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, the battalion commander, turned to Johnson. Looks like your devices are about to get their first real test, Lieutenant. Johnson felt his mouth go dry. Despite his confidence in the technology, the reality of actual combat, with lives depending on his invention, was sobering. Third Company reports they've deployed disruptors at Checkpoint Delta, the radio operator continued. Enemy armor approaching their position. Harper picked up the field telephone. Patch me through to Captain Reynolds at Third Company. Johnson could hear only Harper's side of the conversation, but it was enough to understand that the moment of truth had arrived. Hold your positions, Harper instructed. Let them get within optimal range of the disruptors before triggering. Confirm when activated. Minutes that felt like hours passed as they waited for news. Then the radio crackled to life again. Third Company reports disruptors activated, 3 enemy tanks affected, 2 Tigers and 1 Panzer IV. Turrets have ceased rotation. one Tiger attempting to withdraw but appears to have stalled. A cheer went up in the command post. Harper clapped Johnson on the shoulder, a rare display of emotion from the stoic officer. "They're engaging the disabled tanks now," the radio operator reported. "Two confirmed neutralized. The third is withdrawing under its own power, but appears to be experiencing continued electrical malfunctions. Relay to all companies," Harper ordered. "Disruptors performing as expected. Deploy according to plan and report results immediately." As reports continued to flow in throughout the day, a pattern emerged. Where the Johnson boxes had been properly deployed, German armor, particularly the dreaded Tigers, was being neutralized with minimal Allied losses. The electromagnetic pulses were proving especially effective against the newer Tiger II models, with their more sophisticated electrical systems. By evening, word of the new weapon's success had spread up the chain of command. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, requested an immediate briefing on the technology and its tactical implications. In the German command post, General Oberst Hans von Kluge, commander of the Armored Spearhead, was receiving disturbing reports from his forward units. 3 more Tigers disabled near Elsenborn, his operations officer reported. Crews report complete electrical failure, followed by inability to restart engines. Similar reports coming in from the 653rd Heavy Tank Battalion to the south. "Equipment malfunction?" Von Kluge questioned, his face darkening with concern. "The pattern is too consistent, Herr General," the intelligence officer interjected, "and it only affects vehicles within certain areas. Our signals intelligence has intercepted American communications referring to something called Johnson boxes. We believe this may be a new anti-tank weapon." Von Kluge studied the situation map, noting the alarming number of tank loss markers clustered in specific sectors. "What countermeasures can we implement?" "Without knowing the exact nature of the weapon, it's difficult to say," the intelligence officer admitted. "Our technical staff is analyzing the reports, but they need more information." "Divert the 7th and 9th Panzer Divisions to bypass these sectors," Von Kluge ordered. "Until we understand what we're facing, we must avoid concentrating our armor where these failures are occurring." Back at Allied headquarters, Johnson found himself being ushered into a briefing room filled with generals and their staffs. Still in his field uniform, muddy and exhausted from 48 hours without proper sleep, he felt acutely out of place among the polished brass. General Bradley himself asked Johnson to explain the technology and its limitations. Johnson spoke for nearly 30 minutes, answering increasingly technical questions about the disruptor's range, effectiveness against different vehicle types, and potential German countermeasures. "In summary, gentlemen," Johnson concluded, "the disruptors are most effective against the newer German tanks with advanced electrical systems. The effect is temporary, typically lasting 3 to 10 minutes, but in combat conditions, that's often sufficient. The main limitation is range, 50 yards maximum for reliable effect, less in adverse weather conditions." "And production capacity?" Bradley asked. "Current output is 120 units per day, sir," Johnson replied. "With additional resources, we could potentially double that within a week." Bradley nodded, turning to his staff. "I want production prioritized above all other ordnance projects except ammunition. Distribute the existing units to all sectors facing armored threats, with emphasis on likely approach routes for their remaining Tiger battalions." The German offensive, which had begun with such promise, began to falter in the face of stiffening American resistance. The inability to deploy their heavy tanks effectively in key sectors forced German commanders to alter their plans repeatedly, losing the momentum that was crucial to their strategy. Hauptmann Weber, whose Tiger Company had been one of the first to encounter the new American weapon, was summoned to division headquarters to provide a first-hand account of the experience. "It was as if the tank simply died," Weber explained to the assembled officers. "No warning, no gradual failure. One moment we were advancing normally, the next our electrical systems failed completely. The turret rotation motor burned out. The radio emitted a high-pitched squeal, then went silent. Even after restarting the engine, the electrical systems remained erratic for nearly an hour." "And you observed no conventional attack?" the divisional technical officer pressed. "No new anti-tank weapons or artillery?" "Nothing visible," Weber confirmed. "We suspected mines initially, But there was no explosion, no physical damage to the tank or tracks. The technical officer shared a troubled look with the division commander. This suggests some form of electronic warfare we haven't encountered before. The Americans may have developed a method to disrupt electrical fields at close range. Can our vehicles be protected against such attacks? The commander asked. Possibly, with proper shielding, the technical officer replied. But retrofitting the entire armored force would take weeks, if not months. And without examining one of these devices, any countermeasures would be speculative at best. Then we must capture one, the commander decided. Hauptmann Weber, I'm assigning your company a special mission. You will be provided with infantry support from the 26th Grenadier Regiment. Your objective is to locate and secure one of these American devices intact. Weber saluted crisply, though his expression betrayed concern. Jawohl, Herr General. We will not fail. As December progressed, the weather finally cleared, allowing Allied air power to pound the exposed German columns. The disruptors continued to prove their worth, particularly in defensive positions where retreating Allied forces needed to slow German armored pursuits. Johnson, now operating from Bradley's forward headquarters, worked 18-hour days coordinating deployment of the devices and collecting field reports on their performance. The constant refinement of tactics and improvements to the design based on combat experience were gradually increasing the disruptors' effectiveness. On December 22nd, intelligence reported a concentrated German effort to capture an intact disruptor unit. Intercepted communications revealed that a company of Tigers, supported by elite infantry, was probing American lines in the 82nd Airborne Sector, specifically searching for the devices. They're getting desperate, Colonel Turner observed during a staff meeting. Their offensive is stalling, and they need to neutralize our advantage. We should prepare a reception for them. General Matthew Ridgway, commander of the 82nd Airborne, suggested with a grim smile. If they want to see our disruptors up close, we should accommodate them. Johnson found himself drawn into the planning for what would essentially be a trap, using the Germans' interest in the disruptors as bait. It was a surreal experience just weeks earlier. He had been an unknown corporal working on an unproven theory. Now he was helping plan divisional operations alongside some of the Army's most senior commanders. The plan they devised was elegantly simple. A small force would appear to retreat hastily from an outpost, leaving behind what would look like abandoned equipment, including several disruptor units. In reality, the area would be heavily covered by concealed anti-tank guns and infantry positions, with additional disruptors buried in all likely approach routes. We'll make it look like we left in a hurry, Major David Harrison of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment explained as they surveyed the chosen location. Abandoned vehicles, scattered supplies, the works. The disruptors will be partially disassembled, as if the retreating forces tried to destroy them, but didn't have time to finish the job. The Germans will be suspicious, Johnson cautioned. They're not going to just drive up and collect them. That's why we need to sell it, Harrison replied. We'll plant documents indicating this was a forward testing site for the disruptors. Make them think they've stumbled onto the jackpot. Not just a few devices, but technical documentation as well. The trap was set on December 23rd, with Johnson supervising the placement of the disruptors and the preparation of convincing technical documents that contained just enough accurate information to be believable while including subtle flaws that would render any German countermeasures ineffective. Hauptmann Weber approached the abandoned American position cautiously. His command Tiger moved slowly along the forest road, flanked by infantry who swept the woods for signs of ambush. 2 more Tigers and a Panzer IV followed at intervals, providing overlapping fields of fire. The site appears to be deserted, Herr Hauptmann, his radio operator reported. Infantry reports no sign of enemy presence within 500 meters. Weber studied the collection of vehicles and equipment visible in the clearing ahead through his binoculars. It had all the hallmarks of a hasty retreat, abandoned jeeps, scattered equipment, even a field kitchen with food still on serving tables. Most importantly, he could see what appeared to be a technical workstation with electronic equipment partially disassembled on folding tables. Too perfect, Weber murmured to himself. Yet the opportunity was too valuable to ignore. If those were indeed the mysterious American devices that had been disabling their tanks, obtaining them could change the course of the offensive. "We will proceed, but with maximum caution," Weber decided. "Infantry will secure the site first. No vehicles enter the clearing until it has been thoroughly checked for traps and mines." The German grenadiers advanced methodically, checking every abandoned vehicle and scanning for hidden wires or pressure plates. After 20 tense minutes, their commander signaled that the site appeared safe. "Proceeding to Phase 2, Weber ordered. "Technical team will advance on foot to examine the electronic equipment. All vehicles maintain current positions." As the German technical officers approached the workstations, Johnson watched through binoculars from a concealed position 800 meters away. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The Germans were being cautious, but their desire for the technology was overriding their suspicion. "They've taken the bait," he whispered to Major Harrison, who lay prone beside him. "Technical team is examining the disruptors now." Harrison nodded, his finger poised over the detonator that would trigger the buried disruptors, waiting for maximum concentration of vehicles. The German technical team had reached the workstations and was carefully examining the partially disassembled disruptors. One officer was excitedly paging through the technical documents they had planted. "Hauptmann!" The radio in Weber's tank crackled. "We have found them, the American devices, and technical schematics as well." Weber allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. "Secure everything for transport. We'll withdraw as soon as—" His order was interrupted by his driver's urgent shout. "Electrical systems failing, Herr Hauptmann. Engine shutting down." Weber felt a cold dread as he realized the trap they had walked into. "All units withdraw immediately, it's an ambush." But it was too late. All along the road, the buried disruptors activated simultaneously, creating an overlapping field of electromagnetic pulses that disabled every vehicle in the German column. As the tanks sat immobilized, American anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions, targeting the vulnerable side armor of the Tigers. The battle was brief but decisive. When it ended, 3 Tiger tanks and a Panzer IV lay destroyed, and dozens of German infantry had been captured. Weber himself was among the prisoners, his once proud Tiger now a smoking ruin. As American troops secured the area, Johnson approached the captured German officer. Weber stood with dignified military bearing despite his circumstances, his uniform still impeccable except for a bandage around his left arm, where he had been wounded during the battle. "You are the one who created these devices?" Weber asked, recognizing Johnson from the technical insignia on his uniform. "One of many who contributed," Johnson replied diplomatically. Weber nodded thoughtfully. "A brilliant innovation, simple yet devastating against our most advanced technology." He gestured toward the burning tanks. "You have transformed the battlefield with copper wire and electrical principles. Our command never anticipated such an approach." Johnson didn't know how to respond to this unexpected professional respect from an enemy officer. Before he could formulate a reply, Major Harrison arrived to escort the prisoners to the rear. "Your devices have cost us the offensive," Weber said as he was led away, "and perhaps more than that." News of the successful ambush spread quickly through Allied ranks, further boosting morale at a critical moment in the battle. The German offensive, already losing momentum, began to collapse entirely as their ability to deploy heavy armor effectively had been neutralized. By December 26, the tide had turned decisively. Allied forces were now counterattacking all along the front, pushing the German forces back toward their start lines. The disruptors continued to prove their worth, with over 800 units now deployed across the front lines. At General Bradley's headquarters, Johnson found himself summoned once again, this time to meet with General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, the Supreme Allied Commander. Eisenhower had flown in to personally assess the situation and coordinate the counteroffensive. "Lieutenant Johnson," Eisenhower greeted him warmly, shaking his hand. "I've heard a great deal about you and your remarkable invention. General Bradley tells me you've single-handedly neutralized the German armor advantage." "Hardly single-handedly, sir," Johnson replied, uncomfortable with such praise. "It was a team effort from the beginning, and the frontline units deserve the credit for effective deployment." Eisenhower smiled approvingly at this modesty. Nevertheless, your innovative thinking has saved countless lives and possibly shortened the war significantly. I've recommended you for the Distinguished Service Cross. The recommendation has already been approved. Johnson was stunned. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration that could be awarded to a member of the United States Army, recognizing extreme gallantry and risk of life in combat. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Eisenhower replied. "Your work speaks for itself. What are your plans for after the war, Lieutenant?" The question caught Johnson off guard. With the constant pressure of combat and development work, he had scarcely had time to think beyond the next day, let alone the end of the war. "I hadn't really considered it, sir. Perhaps return to the TVA, or maybe pursue further education with the GI Bill." "You should consider a career in research and development," Eisenhower suggested. "Minds like yours will be invaluable in the post-war world. I'd be happy to write a recommendation to any technical university or research institution you might be interested in." "That's very generous, sir. I'll certainly consider it." As December turned to January, the Battle of the Bulge, the last major German offensive of the war, was decisively defeated. The disruptors, now produced in quantities exceeding 500 per day, were being distributed to all Allied divisions facing German armor. By February 1945, the Johnson boxes had become standard equipment for Allied forces facing German armor. The once dreaded Tiger tanks, which had dominated the battlefield since their introduction, were now viewed with significantly less fear by American troops. The psychological impact of this shift could not be overstated. Allied soldiers now had confidence that they possessed an effective counter to the most powerful German weapons. Lieutenant Marcus Johnson had been transferred to the newly formed Technical Warfare Division, a special unit created specifically to further develop and improve electromagnetic countermeasures. Working from a converted factory in Luxembourg, Johnson led a team of engineers and technicians who continued to refine the disruptor technology. "We've improved the effective range by nearly 30%, Johnson explained to Colonel Edward Mitchell, the division's commanding officer, during a briefing in early February. "And the new Mark III units can be deployed from aircraft, allowing us to disrupt German armor movements well behind their front lines." Mitchell nodded appreciatively as he examined the new, more compact disruptor unit. "Production numbers? 800 units per day across 3 facilities, Johnson reported. "Every frontline division now has a full allocation, with reserves building for the final push into Germany." "Excellent. And the Germans? Any sign they're developing countermeasures?" Johnson's expression grew more serious. "Intelligence suggests they're working on electrical shielding for their newer vehicles, but implementation has been hampered by material shortages. Their existing tanks remain vulnerable." As Allied forces prepared for the final offensive into Germany, German High Command was indeed scrambling to counter the devastating effect of the disruptors. At a secret research facility near Dresden, German engineers worked feverishly to develop protective measures. The American device generates an electromagnetic pulse at these specific frequencies, Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann explained to a group of military officers, pointing to a diagram on the blackboard. "Our tests indicate that a properly designed Faraday cage around vulnerable electrical components can provide significant protection." Oberst Friedrich Schultz, the liaison from Army High Command, frowned deeply. "How quickly can such protection be implemented on our remaining tanks?" Hoffmann hesitated before answering. "With current material shortages, perhaps 50 tanks per month, Herr Oberst. And retrofitting existing vehicles is problematic. The weight of the additional shielding affects performance." 50 per month is insufficient, Schultz stated flatly. "We lose that many to these devices each week." "What about jamming? Can we disrupt their activation signals?" "The devices appear to be largely self-contained," Hoffmann replied. "Most use direct current activation rather than radio signals. Jamming would be ineffective." The strategic implications were clear. Germany's once formidable armor advantage had been neutralized just as Allied forces were preparing for their final push toward Berlin. The timing could not have been worse for the German military, already stretched beyond its limits. Back at Allied headquarters, preparations for the Rhine crossing were underway. Johnson's disruptors would play a key role in neutralizing German armor defending the river crossings. General George Patton, whose Third Army would spearhead one of the main thrusts, had requested a personal briefing on the latest disruptor tactics. "So you're the young man who's given my tankers a fighting chance against those Tigers," Patton said, as Johnson was shown into his office. The general's reputation for bluntness and aggressive leadership was well known throughout the army. "Just part of a team effort, sir," Johnson replied, maintaining his customary modesty. Patton waved away the demurral. "False modesty doesn't suit a warrior, Lieutenant. Own your accomplishments." He unfolded a map on his desk. "Now show me exactly how you plan to deploy these devices for the river crossing. I want maximum effect with minimum risk to my men." For the next hour, Johnson detailed the planned deployment of both fixed and vehicle-mounted disruptors to support the Third Army's crossing. Patton interjected frequently with pointed questions and suggestions, demonstrating a quick grasp of the technology's tactical applications. "We'll position the fixed units here, here, and here," Johnson explained, marking positions on the map. "They'll create overlapping fields covering all likely approaches for German armor. The lead elements of each crossing force will carry vehicle-mounted units as well." "And if they've developed countermeasures?" Patton asked, his eyes narrowing. "Intelligence suggests their efforts have been largely unsuccessful, sir. But even if some of their vehicles have been modified, the vast majority remain vulnerable. And we've developed a new variant specifically designed to overcome basic shielding." Patton nodded, satisfied. "Good. I like men who anticipate problems before they arise." He studied Johnson for a moment. "You know, before the war, a man with your talents wouldn't have had these opportunities in the army." Johnson maintained a neutral expression, unsure how to respond to the general's frank reference to racial barriers. "This war is changing things," Patton continued, "and that's as it should be. Talent and courage are what matter on the battlefield, not the color of a man's skin." He rolled up the map. "Make sure those disruptors work as advertised, Lieutenant. My boys are counting on them." "They will, sir," Johnson assured him with quiet confidence. As March began, Allied forces launched their offensive across the Rhine. The Johnson boxes performed even better than expected, neutralizing German armored counterattacks and allowing the bridgeheads to be secured with minimal casualties. Within days, American, British, and French forces were streaming into Germany proper, encountering increasingly disorganized resistance. During this period, Johnson continued to receive reports from the field, analyzing performance data and implementing further refinements. One report particularly caught his attention. A Tiger tank that had apparently been modified with some form of electrical shielding had initially resisted the disruptor's effects before succumbing to a longer exposure. "They're learning," Johnson remarked to Technical Sergeant Lisa Morales, the brilliant electrical engineer who had been assigned to his team after being discovered working as a radio operator. "But not quickly enough." Morales nodded as she reviewed the report. "This shielding design is actually quite clever. Given their resource constraints, they're using a layered approach with thin copper sheeting and rubber insulation. Can we modify our pulse parameters to overcome it?" Johnson asked. "Already working on it," Morales replied with a smile. "The Mark IV will operate across a wider frequency spectrum specifically to defeat this type of shielding." As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, captured documents and prisoners provided more information about the German response to the disruptors. Interrogation of captured German technical officers revealed the extent of their frustration. "We could not understand how such a simple device could neutralize our most advanced tanks," one German engineer admitted during questioning. "It was as if you had found the one critical vulnerability we had overlooked in our designs." By April, with American forces approaching from the west and Soviet forces from the east, German resistance was crumbling. The remaining Tiger tanks, once symbols of German military might, were increasingly being abandoned by their crews or hidden to prevent capture. Hauptmann Weber, the Tiger commander captured during the Battle of the Bulge, had been transferred to a prisoner-of-war camp in England. To his surprise, he received a visitor, Lieutenant Marcus Johnson. "Lieutenant," Weber acknowledged with a formal nod as Johnson entered the interview room. "This is unexpected. I wanted to ask you some questions about your experiences with our disruptors," Johnson explained. "Specifically, what your technical staff concluded about their operation." Weber considered for a moment before responding. I see no harm in discussing it now. The war is clearly in its final stages. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please, sit. Over the next hour, Weber provided valuable insights into the German response to the disruptors, confirming much of what Allied intelligence had already surmised, but adding technical details that would prove useful for post-war development. Our greatest mistake, Weber concluded, was over-reliance on technological superiority without considering unconventional countermeasures. We designed our tanks to withstand physical attacks, armor-piercing shells, explosives, even aircraft bombs. But an electromagnetic attack, it never occurred to our engineers. Sometimes the simplest solutions are overlooked, Johnson observed. Weber nodded slowly. A lesson I will not forget. May I ask, what will you do after the war, Lieutenant Johnson? I've been offered several opportunities, Johnson replied. Research positions, university admission. General Eisenhower himself has offered to write recommendations. You should accept, Weber said with unexpected earnestness. Minds like yours will be needed to rebuild after this madness ends. He hesitated, then added, I was a professor of electrical engineering before the war. Perhaps someday we will meet at an international conference rather than across a battlefield. I'd like that, Johnson said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. As the European war reached its final days in early May 1945, Johnson received orders to join a special technical intelligence unit being sent to examine German research facilities. Their mission was to secure advanced technology and prevent it from falling into Soviet hands. The unit arrived at a partially destroyed research center near Munich, where German scientists had been working on various electromagnetic projects, including countermeasures to the Johnson boxes. As they sorted through the scattered documents and damaged equipment, they made a startling discovery. Lieutenant, you should see this, called Captain Frank Roberts, the unit's commanding officer. He handed Johnson a folder containing technical diagrams and research notes. Johnson leafed through the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. They were working on their own version of the disruptor, he said finally, but much more powerful, designed to disable aircraft electrical systems from the ground. How close were they to a working prototype? Roberts asked. Johnson studied the technical specifications more closely. Not very. They understood the basic principles, but were struggling with power requirements and directional control. Still, the concept is sound. With more time and resources. He let the implication hang in the air. Pack everything, Roberts ordered. All of it goes back to intelligence headquarters for analysis. That evening, as they secured the materials for transport, Johnson sat alone reviewing the German research. Despite the immediate danger having passed with Germany's surrender, he couldn't help but think about the implications of this technology for future conflicts. In the months following the German surrender, Johnson found himself increasingly involved in classified research projects aimed at further developing electromagnetic warfare capabilities. The lessons learned from the disruptors were being applied to new fields, from aircraft protection to communication security. In September 1945, shortly after Japan's surrender ended World War II, Johnson received a letter from General Eisenhower, now military governor of the American occupation zone in Germany. Lieutenant Johnson, your contribution to our victory in Europe cannot be overstated. The technology you developed not only saved countless American lives but significantly shortened the war by neutralizing one of the enemy's key advantages. As we look toward rebuilding a peaceful world, I am convinced that minds like yours will be essential. To that end, I have recommended you for admission to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's graduate program in electrical engineering, with a full scholarship provided by the newly established GI Bill. Additionally, I have arranged for you to have access to continue your research under military auspices should you wish to do so. The world is changing rapidly, Lieutenant. The technological innovations born of necessity during this war will transform civilian life in ways we can only begin to imagine. I encourage you to be part of that transformation. Sincerely, Dwight D., Eisenhower General of the Army. Johnson sat for a long time after reading the letter, contemplating the unexpected paths his life had taken. From a Tennessee Valley Authority lineman to a decorated officer whose invention had changed the course of the war in Europe, it seemed almost unbelievable. In October, before beginning his studies at MIT, Johnson returned to his hometown in Tennessee. The reception he received surprised him. The local newspaper had published a front-page story about his achievements, and a crowd gathered at the train station to welcome him home. Among them was his former supervisor from the TVA, Howard Mitchell, who greeted him with a firm handshake. "Always knew you were destined for bigger things, Marcus," Mitchell said. "Those days you spent puzzling over electrical problems on the power lines. Who could have guessed where that would lead?" Johnson smiled, remembering the long hours spent troubleshooting rural electrical systems that had given him the insights leading to the disruptor's development. "It all connects," he said, "sometimes in ways we don't expect." Later that week, Johnson visited his old high school, where the principal had invited him to speak to the students. Standing before a classroom of young faces, many of them black like himself, Johnson felt the weight of responsibility that came with his unexpected fame. "The most important lesson I learned during the war," he told them, "is that innovation often comes from unexpected places. The solution to a problem might not be found in the usual textbooks or from the usual experts. Sometimes it comes from applying knowledge from one field to challenges in another." A young student raised his hand. "But you were just a corporal when you invented the disruptor, right? How did you get anyone to listen to your idea?" It was a perceptive question that cut to the heart of the challenges Johnson had faced. "Persistence," he answered honestly. "And I was fortunate to have officers who were willing to look past rank, and yes, past race, to evaluate the idea on its merits. But I also made sure my concept was thoroughly developed before presenting it. I didn't just have an idea. I had calculations, diagrams, and a working prototype." In January 1946, Johnson began his graduate studies at MIT, focusing on electromagnetic theory and its applications. His wartime experience gave him a practical perspective that complemented the theoretical rigor of the academic environment. By day, he attended classes and conducted research. By night, he worked on refinements to his disruptor technology under a classified military contract. The post-war years saw Johnson's innovations applied in unexpected ways. The principles behind the disruptors found applications in medical equipment, telecommunications, and industrial manufacturing. Johnson himself became a pioneer in electromagnetic shielding technology, developing methods to protect sensitive equipment from interference. In 1955, a decade after the war's end, Johnson, now Dr. Johnson, with a PhD in electrical engineering, attended an international scientific conference in Geneva. As he examined the attendance list, one name caught his attention: Dr. Klaus Weber, former Hauptmann in the German army and now a professor at the Technical University of Munich. During a reception on the conference's second evening, Johnson approached Weber, who recognized him immediately. "Dr. Johnson," Weber said, extending his hand. "Or should I say, Lieutenant Johnson, it is good to see you in more peaceful circumstances." "Dr. Weber," Johnson replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm glad you made it here. You mentioned this possibility when we spoke at the POW camp." Weber smiled. "I did not forget, and I have followed your work with great interest. Your papers on electromagnetic shielding have been particularly valuable in my own research." The two former enemies, now colleagues in scientific advancement, spent hours discussing their respective work and the remarkable ways that wartime innovations were being adapted for peaceful purposes. "It is ironic," Weber observed as the evening drew to a close, "that a technology developed to disable tanks is now being used to protect the very electrical systems it once targeted." "That's the nature of progress," Johnson replied. "We take what we learn and apply it to new challenges. The trick that stopped Tiger tanks is now helping to power hospitals and telecommunications networks." Johnson's contributions to electrical engineering continued throughout his career. He became a respected professor at Howard University, mentoring generations of engineers and scientists. The principles he discovered while developing the disruptors eventually contributed to technologies ranging from medical imaging equipment to early computer components. When the full story of the Johnson boxes was finally declassified in the 1970s, historians began to recognize the significant impact this relatively simple innovation had on the closing months of World War II in Europe. Military analysts estimated that the disruptors had neutralized over 500 German tanks and armored vehicles, saved thousands of Allied lives, and potentially shortened the European war by several weeks. In 1982, at the age of 68, Dr. Marcus Johnson returned to Belgium for a ceremony commemorating the Battle of the Bulge. Standing at the edge of the forest where his devices had first been deployed in combat, he reflected on the long journey from that cold December in 1944. A Belgian official approached him with a small wooden box. "Dr. Johnson, the people of Belgium have not forgotten your contribution to our liberation," the official said, opening the box to reveal a medal. "This is a small token of our gratitude." Johnson accepted the medal with thanks, though he remained characteristically modest about his role. "I was just one person among millions who contributed to the Allied victory," he told a reporter covering the event. "The real heroes were the soldiers who used these devices on the front lines, often at great personal risk." Later, walking alone through the peaceful forest that had once echoed with the sounds of battle, Johnson paused at the site where the ambush for Weber's Tiger Company had been set. A simple stone marker had been erected, commemorating the action. As he stood there, a group of American tourists approached, led by a guide who was explaining the battle's significance. Johnson listened quietly as the guide described how American forces had used innovative technology to defeat the feared German tanks. The electromagnetic disruptors, known as Johnson boxes, changed the course of the battle, the guide explained. They were invented by a black American soldier who had been an electrical worker before the war. His insight came from his civilian experience, proving that diversity of background and experience creates military advantage. Johnson slipped away before being recognized, but the guide's words stayed with him. His greatest satisfaction came not from the medals or academic recognition, but from knowing that his work had helped open doors for others who, like himself, came from backgrounds not traditionally associated with scientific innovation. In his later years, Johnson often spoke to young engineers about the importance of bringing diverse perspectives to technical challenges. The wire trick that stopped those tanks wasn't developed in a traditional laboratory, he would tell them. It came from years of climbing utility poles and troubleshooting rural power systems. Never underestimate the value of practical experience and unconventional thinking. Dr. Marcus Johnson passed away in 1991, leaving behind a legacy that extended far beyond his wartime innovation. His former students occupied positions of prominence in industry, academia, and government. The principles he discovered continued to influence the development of electromagnetic technology, and the story of how one Marine's wire trick had stopped the dreaded German Tiger tanks became a lasting testament to the power of innovative thinking. Today, the Johnson box is displayed at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, alongside other innovations that changed the course of World War II. A simple device of copper wire and electrical components, it stands as a reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions come from unexpected sources. In the military academies of the United States and its allies, the story of Marcus Johnson is taught as an example of how diversity of experience and background strengthens armed forces. And in engineering schools around the world, students learn about the electromagnetic principles that Johnson applied so effectively, principles that continue to underpin technologies we rely on every day. The German officers never knew that one black US Marines wire trick would stop all their Tiger tanks, but in that unexpected innovation lay a lesson that resonates to this day, that true advantage comes not just from technological superiority, but from the diverse perspectives, experiences, and insights of those who create and apply that technology. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.